There is something I have learned in my time, something that others always fail to see and never account for. It's something that, at its surface, is very simple, that could easily be overlooked, and yet has won us countless battles and changed the very events of our history. It's the human spirit. We are resilient against causes we know are wrong and can survive things we really shouldn't. I've seen a soldier have his arm, leg, and half his face blown off in an explosion that killed his commanding officer. Yet he picked up his machine gun and held his point as ordered. He stared down the face of a charging werewolf and shredded it to pieces. He died shortly after, of course, but were it not for him slaying such a beast and holding the enemy at that point for so long, the trench we sit in now would have fallen. Oh, you are technically his replacement, by the way. This was only 2 weeks ago, so, big boots to fill. But as I was saying, I can think of few better examples of the power of the human spirit than that of the glorious army you find yourself within now. The forces of the Principality of New Antioch. For a few hundred years now, we have stood against the forces of hell, and we will continue to do so until time's end and God's plan is fully enacted. We had been here from the beginning, really. The beginning of war with hell, that is. When the gateway to hell sprung forth and vomited demon spawn into the world, they took whatever lands they could. But it was at Antioch where the forces of Christendom made what many thought would be a final stand. Crusaders, knights, and peasant militia alike made a blockade to hold them off. But they survived the day, then another, into the next. Then a week passed, then a month, then 2 more. A year goes by, and the place still stands. After 10 years, it was clear that Antioch is where demons go to die. For almost 500 years, that city stood, although by that point it resembled a giant castle complex more so than a city. All those who lived within would have been born and bred for war, and countless others joined their ranks to hold that city. And people from the highest of kings to the lowest of peasants would have sent relief and aid to it, to make sure that city stands. Unfortunately, it didn't, with most reports claiming that in the year 1545, the city fell in an instant. We don't know how or why, not fully anyway. It was probably an infernal hell weapon, something dreadfully powerful that was able to just take the city from the earth in a moment. At least that's what we can gather, as all the forces of the enemy we have managed to interrogate seem to think that is what happened, although their stories never seem to fully align, and you can never trust a servant of hell. There is more to this, I feel, a story we have yet to unearth, someone's master plan at play, but I think only time will reveal such secrets, and in the end, the result is the same. The front line of our forces was just gone. So we built a new one. Other forces helped us hold the line for the 50-odd years it took to rebuild, but their stories will have to be saved for another night. Were it not for their help, however, we would not have the grand base we do now, the Principality of New Antioch. The greatest bastion against hell's forces, the strongest nation under this Christian faith. A grand fortress city, built and maintained for one purpose: war. However, unlike before, everything is done in a more official capacity now. See, before it was just lords sending volunteers, an unregulated system of people sending whatever they were willing to. But now, with the church's recreation of the Principality, it is seen as a proper nation in its own right, of sorts anyway. The church set up a tithe system, but not for coin. Those head straight for the papal lands. Instead, the tithe all kingdoms must pay is that of food, tools, ammunition, weaponry, even machinery, and most importantly, volunteers, be they workers, engineers, or soldiers. In what form the lands choose to pay is entirely up to them, but these tithes should always be met. It is your sacred duty to the Lord and all of Christendom. All of Europe and most of Africa send their best and brightest. Then, when they arrive, they are given initiation, where they take the oath of New Antioch, which I shall repeat now for your memory. I swear to serve faithfully, loyally, and honorably to the reigning Duke and Duchess of New Antioch, and their legitimate successors, to devote myself to them with all my strength, sacrificing even my life in their defense. I assume the same duties towards the Prince of the Church and the city of New Antioch itself, for she is the home of all our hopes. I shall make war against the heretic without cessation and without mercy. I also promise my commander and the other superiors respect, fidelity, and obedience. Thus I swear, may God and our holy patrons assist me. Then the guards upon the walls will respond, I swear to faithfully, loyally, and honorably observe all that is read to me at this time. May God and our holy patrons assist me. The men and women will then be assigned into their forces, known as warbands. Keep close to your warbands. They are going to be your brothers and sisters now. You all have your role and rank, and you are expected to know the basics at this point. Some warbands, however, have a unique situation. Instead of them being split up into standardized forces, they will be able to form their own. And while still getting the training and having to take the oath of New Antioch, they are often sent back to their homeland after, as a sort of defense force. These warbands can also be comprised of different units entirely, often fitting in more with their homeland's armies of old. Although many can still be sent to the front should their specialities be needed there. But wherever they are sent, it does not matter too much, for at the end of the day, the warband's leader has the permission and allowance to relocate and to move to where they think they are more needed. The leader is also responsible for their coin and equipment, however, but this does result in them being able to keep whatever they find out there in the trenches. They do, however, need to make reports to their higher-ups, and if they request something, it must be handed over to them. But they will be compensated for it in some form. But surviving in times such as these can be difficult, and so most warbands will turn to and venerate a patron for aid, often a saint whose values and ideals align with theirs, be they living or dead. If the warband fights well in their name, they may even have blessings and miracles of holy aid. Although those of a more earthly-minded warbands might seek financial aid from the likes of nobles or monarchs instead, but I suppose it's not unheard of for a warband to have both. In fact, many kings have all but done away with their own army, and have simply taken on becoming a patron to warbands. And if their warbands are made up of countrymen, which they almost always will be, this works in everyone's favor. Fighting men and women train in the best place on the planet, get fully equipped, and return to their homeland to defend it from the forces of hell. Really, no one has complained about this system other than the amount of freedom that a warband gets in and of itself. But let me now get into how these warbands are actually comprised, what ranks and roles they have, at least the standardized regimented ones. We will be here till hell froze over if I listed every special kingdom variant. Perhaps one day, should the need arise, I will bring the topic back up. The leader of a warband holds the rank of lieutenant, which is what I am. The lieutenant often selects a second to be their right hand and replacement should something happen to them. The second will take control if they die, until a replacement lieutenant can be sent. This is needed since it can take a while to send one, even under the calmest of situations. And let me tell you, we lieutenants can be a mixed bag. While many of us are forged simply by years of service on the battlefield, many make it to this position due to nepotism. Some lieutenants are the bravest of men, charging giant monstrosities head-on, screaming inspirations from the top of their lungs. Other commanders lead from the back, as they would put it, sometimes not even fighting with their soldiers at all. I think I sit somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, as most lieutenants do, for I served about the third of the time it would take for one to naturally become one. The reason for that is a relative of mine wrote a letter of recommendation, which got me promoted early. However, since then, I have lived on for long enough and then some to earn the rank naturally, so I feel no guilt in this now. Though perhaps my rank alone is the reason I have survived. And at the time, it weighed on me heavily. But that's a topic for another day. As I said before, it is their responsibility to look after the warband, and it is on them should supplies run low. But they will get to keep all that they find, and can lean on powerful figures should they need to. Most of them will keep the best equipment for themselves, and they can also organize their force however they see fit, meaning that no two warbands are going to have the same composition, and ones with more money are going to have better arms, armor, and also more troops, since they have to pay their wages as well. But we would not be forces under God if we didn't have spiritual help, and holy warriors under our warbands. And ones that can often be found amongst our number is that of the trench cleric. Their role is not just the well-being of the men, but also the wielding of the Lord's power to aid us. And while they chant their hymns and inspired battle prayers, they have been known to perform miracles like the healing of the righteous or the smiting of the wicked. You can easily denote who a trench cleric is, for they often have an entire shrine stapled to their back to denote their faith and dedication. Many of them have often taken on the cross like the Lord did, or some other venerated symbol, perhaps a whole dioramic carving of their homeland's patron saint. Whatever it is supposed to be a burden, as the weight in some way proves the merit of their words and the dedication of their cause. But there is another holy figure, that of the sniper priests. These men are actual priests who have volunteered to join the forces of God, and help them in a way that only they can. See, any priest can hear the words of God. He whispers secrets of wisdom to his faithful, but sometimes they are faint and very hard to make out. So if a servant of God that hears these whispers wish to join the ranks, they often become a sniper priest. In order to better hear the words of God, however, they remove a sense. The sniper priests willingly sacrifice their eyes, often carving them out in a ritual, proving their faith and devotion to the church and the smiting of their enemies. Now you may think it's silly to give the blind man the position of sniper, but you would be wrong. For with this distraction of sight now gone, they can more clearly hear the voice of God, who tells them exactly where to aim in order to shoot his foes. All the priest must do is listen and have faith in the Lord who will guide his hand, with the actual skill of the priest, however, still coming into effect. But do not forget, they're still priests, and in so just as good at inspiring the men and offering holy words of wisdom. And if you ask me, every warband should have at least one of them or a cleric for holy assistance. You have no idea how important that is for the morale of the men. But now I should get into the backbone of our forces, the fighting man. The standard infantry is that of the yeoman, armed with a standard issue bolt-action rifle, and is the position given to everyone after they finish their training and take up the oath. If you ask me, everyone should start out as a yeoman, as I did, and with the exception of some nobility, most fortunately do. A warband should have several yeomen at any given time, and while new and inexperienced, I find that the greatest of men forge themselves in but one moment. And if you don't let them prove it to themselves, then you are wasting the prime potential that any soldier has. A fool underestimates the pawn, after all, although calling our brave men and women by such a title should be seen as an insult, so I retract my words. But there is also a special role some yeomen take up, that of the trench mole. While not an official rank, it is often the first thing many yeomen will designate amongst themselves, for their need is vital on the front lines. They specialize in the digging and navigating of the many tunnels and trenches that scatter the land, and without them, who knows how much longer a crucial supply run or wave of reinforcements would take. And they work quite well in tandem with our melee specialists, the shock troopers. You may think it stupid to fight primarily with a sword when guns are becoming so advanced, but I have seen their effectiveness firsthand, and if many of their forces are going to charge forth as well, it would be folly to not have men prepared for such an advance. I've seen one of these bastards stare down a half-demon more than twice the size of him, and charge at it head first. No fear nor hesitation, and while he held it at bay, the rest of his squad joined him, and together they overran the beast. With bravery and sheer dedication, they overcame a foe much greater than they are. I mean, really, anyone who has the balls to fight with a sword in times such as these should be commended, especially if they are still around to tell the tale and show their scars. And men like them will always be in demand, while demons and monsters who charge first roam the earth. But moving on, there is also the best equipped soldiers in our armies, those who are the top line in defense. The mechanized heavy infantry are walking tanks in human form, and if I'm being honest, I'd take a handful of these lads over a tank any day, for they are as resilient as one, but with all the mobility and versatility of the frontline soldiers they work so well as. Granted, those suits are not cheap and are a nightmare to run and maintain, but their effectiveness on the battlefield more than makes up for it, I feel. Of course, an untrained man or woman would probably buckle under the power of one of these things, so a lot of training is needed in order to be allowed one, and only veterans are allowed one of these things, with no exception. For yes, while money can buy you one, it's not going to stop your own body from failing to be able to use it. In a few exceptions where rules were broken, I've seen a noblewoman try and use one of these suits. After 5 minutes, she jumped out of the thing and vomited what looks like her entire guts out. She was fine, of course, but she hasn't stepped foot in one since. It goes without saying that the suit takes a huge strain on the body. To make up for this, you don't only have to be the best of the best with years of training to get into one, but you will also be given chemical enhancements in order to remain active while on duty. Despite the trial and ordeal it is to just get into one of these, many see it as an honor. Because of this, many of those who train to wield such armor have been put in what is known as light machine armor, something that is in no way as powerful or intensive, but still as restraining and bulky, in order to train their body to get used to the sensation. It can also be used as a test for the soldier as well, to make sure that they have the right stuff in order to be given the full suit. Out on the fields, these suits are maintained by our next specialist soldier, the combat engineer. This is simply an engineer who has volunteered to join a warband, and by God, these men are handy out on long campaigns far away from supply lines and help. For they are not only skilled in the digging of trenches, but the making of other defenses as well. Really though, if you want to fortify a position, you have a conversation with a combat engineer or two, and you will have that location a fortress by nightfall. Which is very handy, as you are lucky to get even a day's warning of an enemy's incursion. But many of them are also skilled demolition men, not just in the making of highly explosive material, but also in the disarming of that of the enemies as well. Very handy when you have to venture into no man's land, which has been filled with mines. And lastly, of course, I would be a fool if I did not mention the bloody angels of our warbands who have saved countless lives on the front. The Blessed Sisters of St. Cosmas, the combat medics who tend to our wounded on the battlefield while fighting alongside them. These women are healers first and foremost, being trained at a specialist facility to their saint to do just that. However, times are quite horrid, and as a needed precaution, the sisters take up a modified Hippocratic oath that compels them to help any wounded soldier of faith, no matter how dire the circumstance, as well as dispatching heretics and other enemies that they find on the battlefield without pity or mercy. Sometimes using the very same saw they just removed an ally's limb with in order to remove the head of a heretic. The training they receive at their holy convent is kept secret, and no outsider steps foot within their facility. But all women who leave it are changed. They become bitter, a bit colder, but whatever they put them through bloody well works, for I have never seen one of them even flinch at anything. In fact, it's quite hard to get any reaction from them at all, regardless of if information is good or bad. They will do everything in their power to get a soldier back into the front lines, pushing him out the door if needed, but they wouldn't sweat for a second if that soldier dies a moment later, as long as it accomplished their mission, or at least died trying. Those are the forces of your average warband, and I hope you took them all in, soldier, for you will be seeing a lot of them, and sadly they might not always be on side. Right, I forgot to mention, see, despite the gravity of our task and the weight of a human life, we have orders, objectives, and needs at the end of the day. And with the freedom each warband is given, it is inevitable that two of our own may come to blows. This doesn't happen on the army scale, only when two warbands without contact with the rest of the outside world meet. But it does happen. When it does, it's often for the same reason. Fighting over resources, or because they have two separate patrons whose goal and wants intersect, and so fighting is inevitable. I'm smart enough to at least have a chat with the enemy lieutenant should this happen, but in many cases, that could just be delaying the inevitable. But do not let those few exceptions and dark times fool. We are a force to be reckoned with, not just our warband, but the Principality of New Antioch as a whole. And while some gears spin off in their own direction, it is still a powerful, well-oiled machine who wins far more times than it doesn't. And while it is true that our losses matter far more than our wins, that's why we just don't lose at all. Alright, soldier, you are dismissed. Take some time off and get some rest. We're probably going to have a fight on our hands tomorrow, so stay sharp. Thank you for listening to my tales. I'm the Ashspawn. Feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. But, till next we meet, fellow traveller, have a good day.